Hi, my name is Dr. Dale Hayden. I am here to begin a new process. In fact, I'm sitting right now on our back deck, just hanging out here in this place, looking out at a small yard that we have back here. Love the lattice works and flowers and all this kind of thing. And so I've decided that I'm going to call this vlog, or whatever this is called, it's a show, that I'm going to actually call it On Deck. Kind of a little play on that for where I'm sitting, but also the fact that I have this incredible love for baseball, and we'll share a little bit about those kinds of things as we go, metaphorically at the very least. So, by way of background, I spent a lot of years from the time I was in my early 20s as a pastor, traveling, and supporting ministries and churches elsewhere and all over the world, in fact, and traveled to over 30 international cities, destinations over an 11-year period of time. A real privilege to walk with some of you that are watching over the years in Kenya and Uganda and Russia, Sweden, Lithuania, all over Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Singapore, and into Mexico and southern Mexico, especially down in Oaxaca and Chiapas and some of the Mexican states down there. Tremendous opportunities that we've had to be a part of that kind of thing over the years. So for the past several years, I've been a businessman. I have moved away from doing some of the things that I had done before. It's a part of my story, which we'll talk about as time goes by, but I did want to give you a little bit of background about where I come from and where I've been, and just share that with you. I hope that you enjoy this. I'm going to try to keep this at a reasonable length of time, because I know that our attention span isn't for something like this. Now, Melissa, she's wonderful. She got her Sensi channel, her YouTube channel, and Sensi. I really kind of take my cues off from her, but she really knows how to just be herself and relax. And I get into preacher mode really quickly, and then you never know where we're gonna go. So, do want to say to you that that over the years, a lot of things have changed in how I feel and what I believe about certain things. However, I want to identify with you that and share with you that I identify myself as a follower of Christ. I'm a follower of Christ. I was raised in the Lutheran Church. That's where I started, and then as a young man, in my first marriage, my wife was very ill. She had systemic lupus erythematosus, and she actually ended up passing away on her birthday, on her 33rd birthday, and very young. She had all of the complications of that disease. I know more about SLE, lupus, as people know it, than a lot of people, but it was one of the earliest cases diagnosed in America, and she didn't fare well. She had good moments and bad moments, but that's a part of the story. A part of my story is that I responded to a personal walk with God during that period of time. So I just want to say that that over the years, I've been dedicated to really trying to find who I am in God. What is it that He wants to do? And most of us are on a journey of some kind. We're trying to find the path. And this show is not going to enter into an argument about your path or anything like that. I don't want this program to be political. I don't want it to be divisive. I don't want to, my heart on this thing is just simply to share and answer questions, look at some biblical passages and other literature. So anyway, it leads me on to my story. So let me just share that with you for a moment. So I was born in northwestern Pennsylvania. I was very young when I was born. Tried to stay that way ever since. And I basically my whole life I've spent as a kid. We went to church like all the time. I mean, not every day of the week, but one day. We always went to church, never missed church, never missed Sunday school. Even if we were on vacation, we got those little cards, to prove that you were in attendance there. If we were traveling somewhere, I mean, my parents were very dedicated Lutherans. They were very dedicated to that whole idea, and I grew up believing that going to church was the way that you related to God and that you stayed with God and so forth, and that's how I grew up. In my teenage years, I rebelled, not in an out and out, I hate everybody kind of rebellion. I just simply, I was a musician from the time I was in the fourth grade, and I started taking trumpet lessons, and then tried to play the piano, tried to learn how to play the piano. My mother attempted to teach me how to play piano. That didn't work so well. And then from that point forward, I got into guitar. I took guitar lessons from a very good guitarist who only had me take lessons for a couple of months, and then said, you need to play in bands. You need to, sit in with my band. You need to do some things that are, that are different, because I've taken you as far as I dare try to take you. You just need to play. And for whatever reason, God gave me a gift to be able to play rhythm guitar and sing, and be able to play. Rhythm guitar is kind of a backing instrument, but a lot of front people for bands play rhythm guitar and then sing, so that we're not tied up with playing a lot of lead lines on guitar and so forth. So that's how I grew into music, and played with a lot of basement bands, garage bands as a teenager, so to speak. And then as a late teen, I was a young father. I got married very young, and had 2 children in that marriage, but I was still playing in bands. I was working a night shift job. I was doing all that I could think to do to play music more and more and more, so that it would become my life, so that I would be able to just be a musician. I enjoyed writing songs, and I actually literally was writing songs, because at school, in high school, I spent most of my time in practice rooms scoring music and doing things that, kind of lost that touch a little bit now over the years, but I did it when I was a kid, and really enjoyed that. When I first got out of high school, I went to broadcasting college. I had always wanted to go to college to be a music teacher, but I went to broadcasting college because I was already married, already had 1 child, another one on the way, and I went out to Columbus, Ohio, and I went to a broadcasting school, and after about a semester of that, dropped out. First of all, it just didn't feel like my thing, even though I learned how to talk like they do on the radio. At that time, it was a big deal to get the voice. I then went from there, went back home, went to job in a labor job. So here I am, a college dropout, really not pursuing anything but making a living. And at that point in time, I really started playing with bands in the area, and again, garage bands, that kind of thing, but managed to hook up with a really good band that was a lot of good friends. We clicked together. We had some of the most magnificent harmonies, guitar work, had an awesome drummer who went on to become a college professor, had an awesome keyboard player, synthesizer player, who went on to become a professor of music at a university in Chicago, and just a lot of fantastic experiences that we had during that time. Toured around a lot, had a bit of a following, I guess you could say, and we did very little recording. We were, back in those were early days. There wasn't a lot of digitized recording opportunities for bands in the 70s. We just simply followed after our favorites, the Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, Mott the Hoople, Humble Pie, Foghat, Deep Purple, you name it. Those were the bands that we followed after, and we covered some of their songs. Leonard Skinner, some of the other, we covered their songs as they were popular songs, and it got us gigs. We had the opportunity to go out and play, and that was a lot of fun. That was and good money, make some pretty good money back in those days playing in clubs and bars and things like that. It was right in the middle of all of that time, and we got into the party scene a bit. We got, there were just a lot of things that were happening, but the guys I was with were really dedicated to the process, the musical process. We all enjoyed each other most of the time. We had our moments, as people do, but they all revolved around creativity more than anything else. We didn't have personal issues between us. We just simply had some creativity discussions at times, and it turned out okay. And we did have an opportunity at one point in time. We had a PhD professor of music that started to help us with arranging music and so forth, and he had connections, and we had the opportunity to do some auditions for those connections and look at the potential of recording for a major label musically. But there were a few of us in the band that had families, and we discussed it. We really looked at the potential of quitting our day jobs and just doing music and all of that. And all of us kind of came to the point where we said, for those of us that are married and in relationships and have children and all this would be a bad life for them. We'd seen what had happened with a lot of others. Were we the caliber of band that could have done something with all of that? Well, humbly I have to say, yeah, we were. We were probably, really thought of in that way by a lot of people, but it was just, the timing was not there for us, and so we chose not to. It was about that same time that my wife was diagnosed with lupus, and there were a lot of things that were happening in her health that were very difficult, very hard. And at one point in time when she got very ill, I just simply cried out to the God that I knew as a child. Now remember, I'm in the partying scene, rock and rolling, touring around with the band, working night shift, doing whatever I had to do to put food on the table and pay the rent, and basically just got to the place where, she was so ill that I couldn't leave any of those things, and it was very difficult to continue on. And I just simply said to God, I'll do whatever you want me to do, just save her life. I mean, that's the desperation that we got to at that point, excuse me. And long story short on that one, I just simply came to the point where I said, whatever you want me to do, God, I'll do it. I had always knew that there was something inside of me that was drawing me toward being a pastor. I resisted that. I did other things, to not so much actively avoid it, but I just didn't feel like it was the thing that was going to, be my life. Consciously, I didn't, really didn't want to go that way. Subconsciously, spiritually, intuitively, I knew that that's where I was heading, and that's the way it was going to be. So I knew I would have to go to college. I was answering the call. I talked to my pastor in the Lutheran church that was a part of my childhood, and he was a great man, tremendous guy, has just moved from this life to the next here just a few months ago, actually. And tremendous man, and he helped point me in the direction. And because I had a family, couldn't really afford to go to college, didn't have those opportunities like we have today to be able to accrue a lot of massive debt and go to college. So what I did, we'll call those opportunities, what I did instead was I went into the United States Army. And I became a grunt in the Army, and with my eye on chaplaincy, and I became enrolled in what was called at that time Project Ahead, which was a U.S. Army program, a military program that would allow you to go to college, work for the military, and your college education was paid for. And so I was accepted by the University of Pittsburgh as a psychology major, and was in the United States Army. It was during that period of time that some opportunities start to unfold in front of me. The chaplains on post were using me in chapel services. When I got to AIT, preparing to be a chaplain's assistant, I was approached about officers' candidate school. All of these things were going, in that direction where I would be able to maybe be in ministry, but be in the military. And I loved being in the military. I loved it. Now, I was a peacetime military guy. We weren't at war with anybody at that time, at least not any known wars. And so that's the kind of stuff that we did. And had an enjoyable time preaching to a lot of guys that had just gotten off the cattle cars, they called them, coming to boot camp, to basic training in South Carolina, Fort Jackson, and that's where I spent my military time. When it was pointed out to me that there was a Bible college that was nearby and that I could actually switch my major from psychology to ministry and attend that school, and that's what I started to do. I decided, leave behind Pitt, great school, but rather than prepare for a career that I wasn't going to have when I was just trying to get my undergraduate degree so that I could go to seminary, I became involved with the Bible College instead, and that earned me a bachelor's degree in ministry. And at that point in time, a lot of other things started to happen. I became a part of the charismatic renewal in the Lutheran Church. This was a movement that believed that the gifts of the Holy Spirit were real and that those things continued to happen in our time and not just in the first century, but that they happened in our time as well. And I was connected to a lot of very, very good people in that movement within denominational churches and so forth, and became very, very committed to all of this. I was reading the Bible, studying the Bible, deciphering what I could from the New Testament primarily. Didn't have a lot of Old Testament background. My ministry major was focused on the New Testament and on the development of the early church. And I really was looking. I had started a Master of Divinity degree. I was going to go to a Lutheran seminary, and the heads in the Lutheran Church, the people that were leaders in the Lutheran Church, scheduled a meeting with me and sat down. They had heard that I had connected to the charismatic renewal. They knew that. It was no secret. But they sat with me and advised that I should not be a Lutheran pastor, that I should really go find another way, and that they would not endorse me to the seminary. And I thought, that's quite a blow. My whole family had been raised in the church and so forth. I didn't realize that God's plans are way better than mine. And so it took me into a different direction. What that did was that connected me to something called, and you can look this up, Google this, whatever you want to do, called the Jesus Movement. And my connection to people in the Jesus Movement, which was predominantly in California but had swept across the country, really were people like me, had been denominational people, pastors who were really a part of various denominations but felt this need to be very proactive in their faith. And we were just, I was a rock and roller. I was a hippie. I came to know God, and I stepped away from playing rock and roll music, but I didn't stop playing guitar and writing tunes and all this stuff. It's just that I started writing songs to God rather than to a girl, those kinds of songs. I would later return to writing songs to a girl. So, and you've heard that story if you watched Melissa and Maya and Our Story. So, no, in any event, I digress, which you will see that I do quite a bit sometimes. But again, I'm giving you this background so that we can really look at where we want to go with this show and make sure that we're providing a purpose, that we're not just doing this to put something else out there on YouTube or Facebook or wherever this goes, but that we're actually trying to help people that are struggling with issues of faith. So, and I'll get to that part here in just a moment, how I can walk with you in your struggle and feel okay about it because of how you're going to find me to be. I think so. Stay with me here in this story. Just stay with me for just a little bit, and you're going to find. I think you're going to find this to be a more comfortable situation for you. In any event, so I was a part of the Jesus Movement, Calvary Chapel movement. All of that had kind of swept across the country. But the one key thing that drew me there was not about the fact that we were all a bunch of long-haired hippie-type people. I mean, my hair was down to the middle of my back. I had long, straight, blonde hair. I know that's hard to see right now because my hair doesn't grow very well now at my age. But I, long, straight, blonde hair, hippie, very skinny, just kind of, as a young person, just really totally absorbed in what we were doing, really didn't care about a whole lot, was still working, to support the family, to put food on the table, pay the rent. But at the same time, I was very committed to the future in ministry and so forth. So I did that for a little while, and then I was called to my very first church, a little community church in a little teeny community of just 100 or so people. Not the church, the community. The church only had about 25 people. And so it was just a little hole-in-the-wall church. It was a great experience for me for a first-time pastorate, and had a great opportunity to meet these people, salt of the earth people, and it was a great experience. And I was there from Easter to Easter, so it was 1 year exactly, but that church was just in a place where, the two of us, the leadership in that church and me, there was just not a meshing that took place there. The good people remained friends, but it was time for me to move on. And another group of people that had been influenced by my ministry to that point, if I could say that, I don't want to make that presumption, but they called me to be the pastor of a brand new church, and that church ended up being about 85 people or so. Really small. These are small gatherings. These are really small things. But it launched me then into eventually full-time ministry. I left a job that paid pretty well, that took care of the family well, and I left it for about 25% of the money, just to follow what my passion was at the time. I was still playing music, leading worship, writing songs, doing things like that, but I was incorporating all of those old Maranatha and Vineyard songs and all those things, for those of you that know about that kind of thing. Well, I love my backyard here. I've got birds, I've got, all kinds of sounds you're going to hear in the background. This is what we like. Melissa records her shows inside, and you get to hear our bird inside. You're going to hear the outside birds here. So at any event, all of this kind of led me down this path and in that direction. Eventually, long story short, I got my master's degree in biblical literature and a doctorate in theological subjects, all earned stuff over time from Masters International University in Evansville, Indiana. Very strong evangelical school that developed, really was the pioneer in distance education, which everybody is doing and all the major universities are doing now. They kind of laid the foundation for doing all of that, and I was privileged to be a part of that. They had been doing it for quite a while by the time I got there, but very, very good folks. And I was a full-time pastor, and I was pastoring a church that had been started with just a handful of people, and eventually would develop to over 500 people, over 700, including the children, and building buildings and doing all this kind of stuff. And it was at that point in time that I was invited to be a part of the various ministries that were traveling. I was invited overseas. Had never been out of the country other than Canada, which I live fairly close to, but invited to travel to southern Mexico with a leadership group, teaching leadership seminars to pastors that didn't have formal education. All of that happened there, and then traveled overseas with a really good friend of mine who invited me to come along, and we went to Sweden and Lithuania and Russia, and I had already been to Korea with him a couple of times, and been to Singapore, and then eventually would go to the Philippines, so several times traveling to these places and teaching at seminars. And my primary role has always been in the area of worship and spiritual warfare. Those are the things which I've really focused on. And don't let that scare you. There's nothing to be afraid of, I assure you. And so I was the lead pastor of that church for a total of 15 years. During that period of time, I still had to work to make a living early on in the life of that church. It was a small one, and so I got a job working for the court system, and I worked as a parole officer for a dozen years, about 10 years during that time, and then went with the church full-time. But a total of 15 years as the lead pastor there. Started the church with a really good friend of mine. He's a friend today. He has moved on to doing some pretty major things in youth development throughout the world, especially in the third world. And both of us carried the same kind of burden in our hearts. So I'm grateful for that relationship and that it continues today. And then through a series of circumstances, which we will talk about at some point in time, as God leads, I left that church. I went into business, and Melissa and I got together during that same period of time, and we have been together ever since. So now about almost 13 years of walking together in this life. And just now, I am having this sense of direction that says it's time to get back to doing what I did. I had written a book back, was published in 2005, called Radical Vessels: A Cry to the 21st Century Church. Excuse me, sorry. And the impetus of that book was really based on what I saw happening all around me in the life of Christianity, and how the culture of Christianity had moved from being an in love with Jesus kind of thing to almost I won't call it a political thing. It eventually would turn that way, but actually had turned more to a growth-oriented thing, success-oriented kind of thing. And I had fallen prey to that a number of times. That, you know, the idea was that if you're a follower of God, then you should be successful at everything you do, and if you're not successful, then you have to wonder about your relationship with God. Those are things I didn't fall headlong into, but it had really, I have a name for when that happens. What has happened here, and what I wrote about in the book, it's the westernization of Christian faith, okay, or any religious faith, if you will. When we don't go back to the roots of it, and we don't really keep it in its context and do the things that are contextually correct, then we end up in a problem, in a jam, because now we're interpreting it based on our own culture, based on our own exposure, what we do, who we are, that kind of thing, our status of life. And when we start to interpret the Bible and other religious literature based on those things, then we're going to make mistakes. They're going to be grievous mistakes, and we're going to forget where we came from originally, not where we personally came from, but where we came from in faith. And I want to spend a lot of time in the show talking about these things, and I want to invite you to send me questions, what you might like to see us talking about. Eventually we're going to do some lives so that we have some interaction. I have a really good friend that I walk with that does lives all the time, and he's very good at it. And I'll reach out to Scott and have him help me with some of this stuff, and we'll really do. And Melissa does lives all the time. She's fantastic. Her show is like amazing. I love it. Everybody loves it that watches it. Well, I'll say most everybody loves it that watches. I want to try to be as accurate as possible. And those that don't, they can just move on, because basically she really, she knows her stuff, and she shares this stuff. And we'll try to get her on the show once in a while, because she's got some insights that are just wonderful insights and have helped me to become a better follower of God over the years. She opened my heart up. You'll hear her talk a lot about her friend Ursula. I knew Ursula also very, very well, and Ursula actually was a manager at a bookstore, at a Walden bookstore. Back when my book first came out, she was the first one to have a book signing, to host a book signing for the book that I had published in '05. So this was, and by the way, I'm in the process right now of making an addendum by writing a second book called Radical Grace, and working on that. And as soon as those things start to pop out and come available, we'll start talking about that a little bit more. So back off the bunny trail. I warned you, I will do that once in a while, but back off the bunny trail, back to the story. The issue is that for the last 13 years, I've been really dedicated to one thing, and that is really trying to find the heart of God and his love for his people, and rid as much out of my own life as possible of this westernization, as I call it, of Christianity, of the faith, of everything. And to do that, you have to now remember that I have a master's degree in biblical literature, which means that I studied exhaustively the literature surrounding the Bible and Bible times. But I've then branched, and especially the Old Testament as well, but I've now moved into studying a lot of things that most Christian churches and Christian people would have a real struggle with, because I want to know how on earth there has been so much division and striving in the life of the Christian faith, but also in all aspects of faith. And it's because we're human beings and we're not perfect, and we don't get a perfect read. We don't understand contextualization. But when you westernize faith issues, whether it's the Jewish faith or Islam or by the way, I believe that Buddhism is more of a philosophy than it is a religion, but when there's some people that treat it as a religion, when you take that out of its context, when you take so many things out of their context and you westernize them, again, that subjectivity, that idea that this has to relate to where I am personally at in the society I live in, and start molding God and molding faith in a way that makes sense to me, well, I start to make mistakes. And somebody says, well, if you just stay with the Bible, just read it. And my challenge to anyone who takes that perspective is, I have no problem with sticking right with the Bible. That's fine. I'm not sure that you can really understand the Bible if you stick just with the Bible. And then I want to talk about the Bible itself. In the Protestant faith, we have 66 books that are compiled together into Biblios, into the Bible. And somebody had to make decisions about what books landed in the Biblios. How did that happen? Who were those people, those individuals? And why did they rule out? This is important because most of you have never been told any of these stories. Most of us never were, as to how all of that transpired, how that took place, and who made decisions on what the Bible was. And a lot of people believe that the King James Version of the Bible is the only version of the Bible that we're supposed to use. And I think you would be surprised to find out that the settlers in America didn't bring the King James Bible. They brought the Geneva Bible. But we'll get into all of those things as time permits, and we'll look at those issues. Also, a lot of people read the words of Jesus, which the words of Christ, I believe, are essential. Some people say, only the red letters count. I don't know about that. I hope that's not the case. But if the red letters count, then there are some very specific things that Christ said that, I'll be honest with you, we pay no attention to. Well, because why? Because this westernization has molded faith into a picture that we can be comfortable with. The things that make us comfortable, then we want everybody else to be comfortable with. But we don't really look at the whole picture. And what I want to do with this show is with this programming, I want to get us to look at the whole picture. And so it sent me on a journey. I read a little book. I'll plug the book. I'll give credit where credit is due. But it was a little book called The Shack by Young. I'm grasping, trying to remember. Paul. And when I read that, when I first started to read it, I didn't realize that it was a novel. That's kind of strange. But at the end of it, of course, I found out that it was, and that was great. But I saw that this author in particular was having some of the same struggles as I was having, and I reread that book a good half a dozen times, like right away. I ripped it up something fierce. And that book started to open my thinking a bit. I kept thinking, my picture of who God is based on my surroundings and my religion, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, until I try to define God for you the way that God is defined for me. Now we have a problem, because now in essence, I'm starting a denomination. I'm saying, you believe what I believe, or else what you're believing is wrong. And one guy that I knew, one friend, a real biblical scholar, a language scholar, who I had as a guest one time, well-known guy, but I won't mention his name. But he did, he made this statement. The funny thing about us is that in virtually every denomination and every church congregation and every fellowship, doesn't matter what it is, the one thing we all have in common is that we think we are right and that we are the only ones that are right. What a shame. It has created such divisiveness and problems between us that it's really, really difficult to have conversations sometimes with people, because we're a divided society here in America. We have westernized everything to the extent that we really don't look at where we started, and then when we go to look at where we started, we look at that through the shade of our own glasses, how we believe things to be, and that's shaded by where we live and all of that. Again, we're going to delve into this deeper. We want to do that. So I've had the privilege of teaching at Bible colleges and seminaries. I've had the privilege of teaching pastors all over the world and being a part of that. I have a friend who is a best-selling author. He pointed out something the other day, and I thought this was great. I think that it originated with him. He might have given credit to somebody else, I don't remember. But he pointed out that there's no place in the teachings of Jesus that calls anybody to the ministry of leader. And I think that's an interesting statement. In fact, his call is that we be servants. And I remember a guy by the name of Gail Irwin, who wrote a book, I believe his book, I think that it was The Jesus Style. That probably wasn't the right title. I shouldn't have mentioned it before researching it further, but I do remember it was about the upside down kingdom. So the idea is that we're called to be servants before we're called to be anything else. In fact, you can't even qualify to do what I'm doing right now unless you've already made a decision in your mind and in your heart that you are going to be the servant of the people around you. That what you need to do is serve your family, serve your loved ones, serve your children, serve your spouse, serve your job, serve the community. Do everything you can do to serve, because that's where it all begins. And don't aspire to places of leadership, because you'll be very disappointed. I can attest to that. I was a guy who aspired to being a leader, being seen on the platform. I had the privilege of speaking in front of thousands of people. I had the privilege of leading a fellowship that was growing exponentially and was known as an out there kind of church, so to speak, the cutting edge. I was a part of healing movements and things like this over the years. Did all of these things. I think that my heart was right when I went into them, but as you progress into these things, then you start to get it's easy to get full of yourself and forget who God is in this equation, in this whole picture of things. So I want to encourage us there. I want to talk about some of the hard questions, okay? So I've never been a student of other world religions, but when I was working on my doctoral program, I had to take a look at some world religions, some religions outside of the box of Christianity, in order to find out exactly what other people believed and thought and so forth, and how they came to those conclusions. But one of those things that I didn't study was that of Buddhism, and I wanted to find out what on earth this was about. Well, I really didn't want to. It got thrust upon me because Melissa pointed out. She started to read some things to me that I thought, man, these are right on. I mean, these are servant-oriented. Love someone else more than you love yourself. Treat people the way you want to be treated. All of those kinds of things. And I'm going, yeah. And she says, do you know what I'm sharing with you? And I said, I presume that it's some Christian author or something like that. And what she was sharing with me were statements directly from Buddhism and from Buddha. And I was put off by that initially greatly, Long story short, over the years, I've come to understand that there are some wonderful things that God has done in the earth that we have normally rejected because it didn't line up with our thinking. Again, don't forget, if we're in a Western culture mindset, then what we believe is that everything we believe, everyone else should believe. How we see something is how everybody else should see it. We are not taking into consideration the context of their life, where they live, what they do for a living, what they have grown up reading and being exposed to. And what we have to do is we have to look at that. And so somebody says, well, then you're advocating that, you can follow any path and still get to God. Well, why don't you stay tuned and find out what I'm advocating instead of prejudging it? What I'm advocating is that we stop as best we can this Western thinking when we are talking about Near Eastern and Middle Eastern faiths, or even Far Eastern faiths. I'm not suggesting anything else. I'm not suggesting that you subscribe to this way or that way. I'm suggesting that we keep our hearts open and that we take a look at the things that Christ said, but also take a look at what others have said that actually coordinate together very fine. Jesus pointed at the way was very simple. He said, and people will say to me things like, what do you think about helping the poor, and what do you think about stimulus money, and all these things that we've been dealing with here in America in the last couple of years. And I always say this, if Jesus were walking on the face of the planet today, and I think he is through his people, but if he were literally walking on the face of the planet today, I wonder who he would affiliate with, because what he said that we were supposed to be doing while he was away and present in spirit and truth here is feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the imprisoned, love your neighbor as yourself, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. All of these concepts were around in different places during the days of Jesus and before, and Jesus highlighted them and said, here's what the creator of everything in the universe has to say about this. So I'm going to leave you today with this, because we're almost out of time. And then I'm going to encourage you to tune in every week. We're going to get this thing up and running this week, and develop the YouTube channel and wherever else I can get this thing on, because I think that there's value in communication, and I think that something has been put into my heart that may be helpful for us to just have a conversation about. And don't forget, I don't have all the answers. And because I don't, and because I'm always going to look at things from my own view, they're going to be subjective, then I want to encourage you to develop yourself. I think it's 2 Timothy. Study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that does not need be ashamed, but you would be rightly dividing the word of truth, which means study it yourself. Study it yourself. Don't just depend on a human being, another human being. Certainly come to those of us that have trained in this and studied it and live in it daily and all of that kind of stuff to get some direction, but then move in the direction that God leads you in. And I want to share with you actually a biblical passage today, because I think for us to understand what I'm talking about and where we're heading, going clear back, looking at all of the history that I'm in and where I'm at today as a worship leader and songwriter and pastor and leader, this kind of stuff. I'm just, my whole thing is, forget the titles, forget all that kind of stuff, and learn to live the nature of God with everybody around you. What is the nature of God? It's very clearly spelled out everywhere, but in the New Testament it's spelled out like this. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. And listen further. The one who does not love does not know God. Here's the nature. For God is love. Now I'm going to teach you how to refrain from pulling things out of context when you're reading the Bible or you're reading any other religious literature. I'm going to point out to you some of the other companion books that didn't make the cut, that somebody made decisions about. We're going to talk about those books as well. We're going to talk about some other literature that's really, really important to life. And you're going to start to see these comparisons, and you're going to see, hey, wait a minute, God really is up to something all over the planet, always has been, always will be. And that as things come to perhaps a conclusion of sorts, which we'll talk about that a little bit too, because I think it pays for us to talk about these things. There are a lot of people that are wondering what's going on in the earth and where it's heading, and why we're experiencing some of the things we're experiencing right now. There are some conclusions to everything that we relate to. That's the truth. There are conclusions. But we're going to look at this, but we've got to look at it from the viewpoint of the nature of God. And we all know this Bible verse. Even if you're not a follower of Christ, you know the verse of the Bible because you've heard it enough times over the years in our culture. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. But you may want to read the next verse as well. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that through him we might be saved. I think it's really, really important that we understand that God is inclusive. He is leading us to move away from subjectivity and be more objective. He is also wanting to reach out and love virtually every breathing thing on the planet, and that our character and our life should reflect that, because we'll have a much better life if we do that. I love what I just watched Melissa do in one of her, in her most recent show, when she shared very, very simply. I get buzzed by some bees here. I don't know. So, but in any event, she shared, let's like each other. Let's do positive things and say good things to each other and build each other up, and stop this being judgmental, and stop being critical, and stop always trying to find a reason to dislike someone. Let's walk, and I'm adding to this now, let's walk with an attitude of forgiveness. Let's walk with an attitude of reconciliation, restoration, and peace. And if we do that, we're going to, all over the planet, we'll start to reflect the nature of God in a better sense. Now we're going to talk about some of God's guys and ladies, some of God's people that have influenced the world in some major ways. And I hope that you'll join me as we put out the word on this thing and we get it out there. Join me on my deck or wherever we land up actually doing this. Winter comes in northwestern Pennsylvania, so I'm not going to be sitting on this corner of our deck when the snow is flying very often. I might do it once in a while, but I'm not going to do that very often. And but I want you to know that my heart is to help you find peace, find love, find joy, find restoration, find those things in your life that need to be healed, and find true healing. And I will say right up front that I believe that God is alive and well, and that he is still moving in the earth, that he's not some dead religious figure that's off on some cloud, or at the very least, or very most, is off on some cloud, really not engaged in his creation. I believe that God is engaged in his creation. He's engaged in every aspect of his creation. Okay, we had a hummingbird come out back yesterday. Melissa saw him. I didn't see him. I've been waiting for hummingbirds for the last 2 years to show up at that feeder out there. We've got all kinds of other birds, but God cares about that. He cares about the sparrow. He cares about all of this. And I just want to share with you, and you'll hear some great sounds. I love some of these chimes. Ursula gave us this when we first moved over here. It's kind of a little gong. I've got some chimes. I've got some other things. If you're put off by that, then please re-examine yourself. Take a look at it. I would encourage you. I don't think you're going to be put off by it. I think you'll find that we have a lot of fun. As we engage with each other, I want to let you know that some things I won't address. I won't address them on the show. There's a proper time and place to address virtually everything, but my purpose for doing this, my purpose, is to share, contextually share the things that we're sharing, to encourage you, to bring you healing and restoration, to bring you peace, and encourage you that grace works. It really does, and God is full of grace and full of mercy. No matter where you've been, no matter what kinds of things you've gone through or what kinds of things you even did, I know firsthand, God still loves me. He still loves you. He hasn't changed his mind about you just because at times you change your mind about him. And we're gonna share, and we're gonna share a lot of different things. We're gonna share some things that are gonna be easy, some things are gonna be difficult. And it's too hard for me, then I will find answers. I will find people maybe to join us. I'd really like to be able to include, by way of long distance, some of my African friends to be a part of this. Maybe some of my friends from in Southeast Asia, but especially those leaders, those pastors, those teachers, those people that are good friends that are in Kenya and Uganda, and that they could have an opportunity to share with you, and hopefully we can expand beyond that. I'm looking forward to having guests and doing some other things. Make no promises about any of it, but only that I'm committed to trying this. Now I'm going to be recording these, I believe, most of the time on Sunday mornings, because it's a peaceful time, an early Sunday morning to just do this, and it's also great in my schedule. It works out really well, to be honest with you. So I'm hoping that we can do this and that we can get a lot accomplished and a lot happening. And if nothing else, let's just enjoy each other's company. That's really what we want to do. So I'm going to say it one more time because it's kind of become a reality to me, but grace works. It really does. And we'll see you next time on deck.